Like most people, I want something for Christmas, a big surprise. The specific dream item on my list this year is a new laptop, specifically a yoga laptop with a nice processor that can run all my programs nicely. And while the actual cost of that currently runs you about $700, there's a lot more to it. Now, to start this deep dive into what is the true cost of my Christmas wish list, let's first look at the somewhat easy part, the materials that actually go into production. So the biggest thing with that is that the materials that go into electronics are non-renewable resources. Once they're gone, they're gone. And because of the kind of point that we've reached in our world, we've used up a lot of these resources, and we continue to use them more and more quickly as demand for electronics goes up. That is where the main issue lies. One is the collection of many of these materials are very questionable in their ethics. While some are alright, already mining for these materials has a great effect on the environment, on the wildlife and habitats that are being kind of encroached on or overtaken by mining operations. And there's also the long-term effects that a boom and then bust in the economics of a certain mining area can have. And as a lot of this mining is also done overseas, there's issues with questionable labor practices and likely a lot of exploitation of workers and even potentially exploitation of child workers. For the people who are actually doing this work, there is the cost on their health, on the fact that they are getting exploited and put through a lot of stress and work in order to get very little compensation. And while I don't feel the effects of that, and many in first world countries don't feel the effects of that, that is a cost that is being incurred. The other part of the materials is, again, the fact that they are running out. It will in the future cause conflict, similar to any other resource like oil where we've seen literal wars being forged over it. When a material that we rely on so much for our quality of life and for our way of living is gone, that's not going to go without conflict. And in a conflict, especially of this kind of nature, it's going to disproportionately affect people who are already disadvantaged. Those in first world countries probably aren't going to see much of the effect. Those in third world countries will. It's something that you see time and time again with the production thing. Who is actually getting the electronics from this? People in first world countries. But who's seeing the effect? People in third world countries. Who's having to do the labor? Those in third world countries. Who would see the potential effects of conflict? Those in third world countries. So part of the cost is that there is a lot of exploitation of these people for our own benefit. The other thing that comes with production is the carbon emissions and the water usage. There is obviously the carbon emissions from mining, there's the carbon emissions from producing each of the parts and putting them all together, but there's also a lot of carbon emissions from the travel that all of these different materials and parts have to do. Oftentimes the materials and the production and each part, it can all possibly be done in different countries. So in the entirety of the production of this laptop, there's going to be all sorts of airplanes and ships and all of these carbon emissions that are kind of adding up. And then once it's even produced, as oftentimes these kinds of things are produced overseas, it then has to come back to the US, and then it has to be distributed throughout the US to different cities before it can finally get into my grubby little hands. And this again is where we're going to see a lot of the cost add up. Now that's only just the journey before this thing even gets to me. But even once it's in my hands, it's still going to continue to rack up some things. The first thing is the social aspect. By not only buying it, but also by telling people about it, am I not in part not only endorsing consumerism, but possibly continuing and helping other people participate in consumerism? It's kind of hard to say. And it's not a for sure thing, but it is a possible risk that comes with this purchase. The other thing is the power usage. I am not simply gonna open a couple Chrome tabs and some Word kind of girl. I'm put this thing through all of the hardest programs possible kind of girl. And my laptop is almost constantly connected to power. And so that is also going to incur more costs. It's not much, and at this point the average American also participates in this kind of thing, but it is an added thing that's going to come with this. The other thing is the possible things that I can do with this technology. I have a YouTube channel, and while it's small, it still is incurring a carbon footprint. I'm adding things to servers and clouds, and that's using more power. I also am having people watch my stuff. And while it's very hard to find the carbon footprint of an individual channel, there's estimates that about 36 grams of carbon dioxide are released for every hour of video watched. For my channel, at the time of recording this, I have 3,363 watch hours. So if you do the math, that is 121,068 grams of carbon dioxide, roughly equals 0.1 tons of CO2. This is both a lot and not a lot. So it only takes half of a tree to negate this amount of carbon. It's estimated that the average American releases anywhere from 7.5 tons of carbon to 16 tons to somewhere in the 20s. No, sources don't entirely agree on which one is correct. Either way, in that it is a fraction of a percentage of how much is released just by my channel. But then again, in theory, this will continue to grow, and that does still add something. That is still something that wouldn't otherwise be there. On the other end of the spectrum, there is that very non-concrete, I don't really know how to measure it, effect that I could have. That is positive. I don't know how what I do online could potentially positively affect people's mindset about things, if it could change people's actions and possibly have them be more conscientious about what they're doing. And that could potentially negate that 0.1 ton of carbon. It could potentially not. It's kind of hard to say what the exact result of that is. Now, lastly is when this new laptop reaches the end of its life. What do I do with it from there? For that, we're going to use the trusty reduce, reuse, and recycle. So I absolutely use and abuse my electronics until the end. Currently, my current laptop, the power button doesn't work, so you have to press the little pin button that basically resets it, but it also turns it on. The battery life is completely shot, and it must constantly be attached to power. And 3, there's a crack in the top left corner of the screen. But, so long as you have a pencil to turn it on, you have a charger and an outlet, and you don't need the top left part of your screen, you're fine. Needless to say, I try to reduce the amount that I am consuming or that I am purchasing, and I don't like to make unnecessary electronic purchases, which does help reduce the overall footprint that I have as a person. The second thing is reusing. Maybe I can no longer use it as my primary device, but maybe it's great for watching Netflix, or maybe it can be used as a second monitor. I like to do that with my stuff, and it can also help reduce the overall waste that you are incurring. And number 3, recycle. So while this wasn't a thing before, it's now a thing that you can just trade in electronics when you buy a new one. It reduces the amount of money that you spend on your new electronic, but it also means that those parts can be recycled into new laptops. There are currently laptops on the market made out of completely recycled materials that have a neutral carbon footprint. And even for other ones where you're just reusing the materials, but maybe it's not completely carbon neutral, that's still really good and kind of reduces the amount of those non-renewable resources that we're taking up and allows us to continue to keep up our current kind of standard of having a lot of electronics and having enough resources to kind of keep up with that. Because instead of when electronics are done, all of those materials just now kind of being out of the cycle, they can now be reintroduced, and we can kind of get a nice cycle where nothing's being wasted and we always have enough to kind of keep up. So that has been the true cost of my Christmas wish list. So thank you and happy holidays. The other thing is